start now?
Sure. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Valley, and welcome to this very interesting webinar on achieving 100% renewable energy in Scotland. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to make an unusual request. I want everybody to smile, please. You may think this is very unusual and rather chaotic, but I have method in my madness. You see, the big difference between what we're doing now on a virtual meeting and a real meeting is at a real meeting, we smile at people. Whereas at a virtual meeting, we often don't, we often forget. Right. I've been to so many Zoom meetings which are not very nice. It's a bit of a chore because nobody smiles. And so what I'm saying is, when the book of etiquette for Zoom meetings is going to be written, rule number 1 will be smile. Now, there's a second reason for my saying this or requesting it, is that educational specialists tell us, they're quite adamant about it, that face-to-face communication is much, much better when both the communicator and the communicatee are both smiling. In other words, communication is much more efficient and effective with smiley faces, okay? I'm not talking about cheesy grins. I'm talking about a warm countenance or an open or welcoming expression.
Okay, I think we got that. Let's move on. Smile.
Sooner or later, everybody's going to be doing it, but I just thought we'd try it. Now, we are, all of us, at the very beginning of a new industrial revolution, an energy revolution. I'm sure many of us have seen that. But if one examines the first industrial revolution in the 19th century in England, basically, there are many parallels between what happened then and what is happening now. Obviously, the technology is completely changed and totally different, but many of the same factors are the same. Let me express one thing, and that is one chief characteristic, is that the whole process is inchoate. In other words, it's not organized, it just happens. Secondly, that changes or innovations in one area, big changes in other areas, quite willy-nilly, unexpectedly. Thirdly, that changes in certain areas result in wholesale changes to society. If you think about the railways, for example, in 1830s, 1840s, the average speed went up from 10 miles an hour up to 40 miles an hour, 35, 40 miles an hour. And that caused huge changes in society. Another aspect is that there was quite a bit of pushback from those interests who didn't like to see what was happening in the coal, iron, and steam areas. In particular, the canal owners were fought back heavily. The landed aristocracy objected mightily to what was going on. By the way, that's why Buckingham doesn't have a railway today, a railway station. And so when we stand here at the threshold of a new revolution, an energy revolution, the 3 areas of generation, transmission, and storage, it's going to be very difficult to anticipate what's going to happen. All we can say is that there are big changes afoot. Politicians are totally unaware of all these things and unaware of the changes that are going to happen. But we have got an inkling of this ourselves, all of us. For example, for those people who are really much more clued up on this than me, the news has come out recently about the fact that black start technology has been perfected, or is about to be perfected, which means you start up from having no electricity being generated to electricity being generated without the need for dispatchable resources. I understand from my colleague, this is a big deal. Now, how many other big deals are happening? We don't really know. It's just that we are on the threshold, and all of us are in this new energy revolution. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and he is Dr. David Tuck. He's the director of 100% Renewable UK. And by the way, he's the guy who's done a great deal of work getting this going. He's a reader, of course, in energy politics at the University of Aberdeen. He's published papers in referee journals and 7 books, mainly on energy and environmental issues. He's written widely about low carbon technologies and the policies used to promote them. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm sorry about my bad lighting here. Unfortunately, my lighting director was off work today, so that's the excuse for that. I'm obviously not paying them enough money. But to begin with, let's just give the aim of the whole enterprise here, and that's to promote the objective of achieving 100% of all energy used in Scotland being sourced from renewable energy. Now, some people confuse this a bit with the current target, which is to get 100% of Scottish electricity production from renewable energy, or at least is equivalent to Scottish energy consumption. That's not the same thing at all, because electricity makes up only 20% of final energy consumption. So there's quite a way to go. Of course, with electrification of motor vehicles and so on, that'll proceed in a partly natural fashion, given that that's given from Westminster, but the Scottish government certainly has a long way to go. And we're arguing that to get there quickly and most assuredly, most cheaply, then you've got to set this target of 100% of all energy from renewables in Scotland as the way of achieving its net zero carbon target, which the Scottish government has for 2045, and they certainly haven't done that. And also, might I say, is there's a shortage of politicians making this call as well. I know that there are quite a few MSPs who support renewable energy as being the way of achieving these targets, but even the Scottish Green Party MSPs who are committed to renewable energy don't actually have this demand as a part of their programme, that the Scottish government should adopt this target. So that's what I want to promote. And please get more people to sign this petition. We've got about 670 so far, but please encourage people, through social media, whatever else, whatever other means you have, legal and ethical, of course, to do this. So I think we've got a big challenge on our hands, even though in Scotland there's relatively little chance in the near term of nuclear power stations getting going. They're going out of fashion. They're being closed down in Scotland as they fall to pieces. But what we do have to do is to scotch any ideas on the nuclear front that people have got weird notions of small modular reactors, and also particularly the oil and gas lobby, who are trying to get subsidies for their own continued oil and gas production in the shape of carbon capture and storage, which at best is only going to happen for a very long time. And there is an awful lot of loose ends about that, an awful lot of questions to be answered. And, I think it's typified by the attempt by Equinor to get £75 million for a project on the Humber to supply 30% of the gas input energy from carbon capture and storage produced hydrogen. They want £75 million so that they can carry on firing their gas-fired power station with mainly gas. Is this a joke or what? So what good is that going to do us? You could get virtually nothing. You need to pay virtually nothing for more wind power or solar power. You just need to award the contracts. Why are we considering paying out sorts of quantities of money? So let's forget about, or try and forget about, the attempts by the oil and gas industry to get funding for all sorts of projects that are going to take a lot of time to get nowhere, and focus on renewable energy. And if you do that, then we can get together the sorts of system that we need for 100% renewable energy, because the danger is at the moment we're going to spend a lot of time chasing these attempts by existing powerful industries that have got an awful lot of money to support not very good notions, and we're not going to get to the point of reorganizing the system for 100% renewable energy. Now, there's no doubt we've got enough renewable energy, well, for the whole of the UK, never mind Scotland, because you'd only need 7% of the sea of the UK's sea space in its economic exclusion zone to in its EEZ to power all of UK energy. For Scotland, well, you know, over half of the UK's EEZ is actually in Scottish waters.
David, 2 minutes.
And we know it's cheap with the offshore wind farm prices, so we can do it. But what I would want to press here for is that we badly need investment on means to balance 100% renewable energy, because the attention of the system operators and the national grid is being distracted. And instead of spending £75 million or whatever the Scottish government is going to come up with to subsidise more oil and gas production in another guise, we should be spending it on projects that can balance 100% renewable energy. And for instance, I would pick out, for instance, the ammonia idea, that you can produce and store renewable energy through ammonia, through electrolysis and co-production of ammonia from hydrogen, and store it and then use it in gas engines or gas turbines. It's already a plausible system, but it needs developing. We ought to be spending money on that sort of thing, so that we can store lots of energy for renewables when there's not so much wind or sun. That's what we ought to be spending our money on. And right. So as a final thing, get people to sign the petition.
Right. Thank you, David. Now, for that wise contribution, I'm now going to introduce our second speaker, who is Dr. Keith Baker. He's a researcher, campaigner, and journalist based at Glasgow Caledonian University at the Built Environment Asset Management Centre. He's a co-editor of recent books, Critical Review of Scottish Renewable and Low Carbon Energy Policy, and the Palgrave Handbook of Managing Fossil Fuels and Energy Transitions. Over to you, Keith.
Hey everyone, I've got the awkward job of representing 4 organisations, so I've got a list of 8 points that I'm going to get through as quickly as I can, hopefully in 10 minutes. I'm a researcher at the Built Environment Asset Management Centre at Glasgow Caledonian. I'm a co-founder of the Energy Poverty Research Initiative, which was a little organisation set up in 2011 to further the cause of fuel poverty and energy research in Scotland. I'm a member of the Commonweal Energy Working Group, who I will come back to in a bit, because there's been some news on that front for those who've been watching Scottish politics over the weekend. And I'm actually also representing Scientists for Global Responsibility tonight, who are an amazing Nobel Prize winning organisation campaigning, amongst other things, against banning nuclear weapons and nuclear power. Just to address the science first, we know that around 2/3 of the currently available fossil fuel resources have to stay in the ground if we've got any chance of achieving our climate change targets. We need to eliminate coal now. We need to follow it by oil and gas. We really should be aiming for 2030, and we need full decarbonisation by 2045 without leaving anybody behind. And I will stress that last point. As part of that, we need something that I've been personally campaigning on with these with 3 of these organisations. We need robust and accurate measurements of demand. We need to be basing energy decisions about our energy future on accurate measures of energy demand. So if you know about energy performance certificates, I could do an entire 2 hours on them. They are largely based on model data. It's something we've been campaigning heavily on in Scotland. We are up against vested interests in this, organisations who make their money off delivering EPCs. Commonweal and myself and others, and the Beam Centre have proposed our own, our own alternative way of using, delivering energy performance certificates that is completely in line with the European legislation that governs them, and that uses real data as opposed to model data. So far, the Scottish Government has been quite resistant to this, despite at least one big report saying that they should be doing it. But we've got a dialogue going with somebody senior about EPCs at the moment, and hopefully there might be more of that in the press in the not too distant future. Moving quickly on, in terms of where we go in the future, solar is a massive unexploited resource. You know, we use very, very little solar in Scotland compared to what we could be using, particularly solar thermal, but solar photovoltaics as well. Something that myself and Commonweal and the Built Environment Asset Management Centre have been pushing a lot on is using large-scale solar thermal to fuel district heating systems. Denmark, work pioneered largely by Ramboll and the Danish Energy Agency, has shown that you can develop a district heating system to provide low cost, and we are talking 30 to 50 euros per megawatt hour heat to households, where you'll get over 50% of that demand from large scale solar thermal, backed up by possibly small scale local biomass, possibly heat pumps, any number of technologies you can plug in, heat recovery, particularly from existing heat sources. But the critical component in that is getting interseasonal thermal storage, which for those of you who hear that phrase and go, what on earth is that? Think covered reservoirs and boreholes. It's a critical component of the system. Denmark is well ahead. Sweden, Austria, and a few other countries are now implementing these systems. And we really, really want to see Scotland being the first component of the UK, for however long we're part of the UK, to actually push this forward. I mentioned equitable solutions. I've done a lot of my work now focuses on rural areas and alleviating fuel poverty there. We did a report funded by Cala, but not at all influenced by Cala. I have to say that, just because we were funded by a commercial company, they gave us, absolute freedom to say what we wanted to say based on some of the information. Well, using some of the data they were providing us. So we wrote this report, Carbon Free, Poverty Free, published by the Beam Centre, Commonweal, and EPRI, and we looked at various solutions. Again, solar thermal comes out as the easy win. Why on earth, we do not have every household in this country with appropriate roofing space with solar thermal panels on their roofs is still beyond me. It's cheap, it's reliable, people like it. Okay, you might not get 100% of your energy demand, but you may well get close to that. It varies on household lifestyles, but it's a simple, easy win, and it's a cheap win. And why the hell we are not doing more of it is just beyond me. In terms of the biomass, for those of you who know me in my past, I've got a history on both sides of the biomass debate. I'm part of the reason that Forth Energy pulled out of one large biomass plant in Scotland. I don't want to see large-scale biomass, but what I do want to see is small to medium-scale biomass using local and sustainable timber waste and timber products, forestry products, drawn from native forestry woodland plantations. If you look at Inzivar woodlands near Dunfermline, that's the sort of model we want to be following, creating employment, creating recreation, tourism, and really enhancing our biodiversity. These are all things that gel together and give us lots and lots of easy wins, not just for carbon emissions, but for the economy and for society as well. I have to say, putting my SGR hat on now, we can do all this without nuclear. Nuclear is far too expensive, it's far too risky, and even if, like me in the past, you thought, well, maybe the safety risks are a bit overstated, it's too risky in terms of costs. We've seen with Hinkley C and with Wilfer that the costs of these plants just generally go upwards. Nuclear at the moment is heading well beyond wind in terms of costs. So, we do not need it. And also, in terms of meeting those targets, meeting that 2030 target, any technology now that has a lead-in time of more than 10 years, we should be writing off. The risk of that going beyond 2030 is far too high. Every technology that we install now needs to be renewable, or at least low carbon, but really 100% renewable. And beware, I'll come back to this in a second. The fossil fuel industry is lobbying really, really hard now. We should not be advocating spending a single penny on investment in fossil fuels.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, I'll get there. Now, in terms of tying this all together, Commonweal hat now going on. Back in the end of 2018, we produced the Common Home Plan. I can post links to this, I can post them in the chat afterwards. It's a fully costed plan to decarbonise Scotland for £170 billion, without leaving anybody behind by 2040 to 2045. We've got a new version of that, the Resilient Scotland Plan, and that's the post-COVID version of it, and it's showing how we can implement that plan in a post-COVID world and be part of that recovery. The Public Energy Company, which apparently is still a live subject, is one of our policies. I've been pushing hard, and I know Ian's been involved as well, on the Scottish Energy Development Agency. Now, those of you who have been aware of Scottish politics over the last weekend know that there's been a bit of a sea change within the Scottish National Party, and Commonweal has been a very, very big part of that. So we're really quite optimistic now as how we can drive the SNP to actually start delivering on some of the things that it's talked about for a very long time and done very little on. And finally, just looking ahead, we've got the COP coming to Glasgow in November of next year. Hopefully see some of you there and welcome you all to our wonderful country. I just wanted to leave it on a note of what people can do. You can lobby your MPs, you can lobby your MSPs if you're in Scotland, create Twitter storms. I mean, this webinar has gone down really well on Twitter. I wish we could have had more people, but we need to accommodate people speaking. Switch to renewable energy suppliers, switch away from banks and any companies that invest in fossil fuels. And when we're allowed, we need to get our boots on the streets as well. This is about throwing absolutely everything at the next year and the next 10 years to make sure that we can get there. So it's really good to be part of this. And thanks to Dave for organising it. And hopefully at that point, I've hit my 10 minutes.
Yes. Thank you. Well done, Keith. Thank you. It's certainly nice to get a healthy dose of socialism involved here. It really is. And badly needed. It really is. I'd now like to turn to our next speaker, who is Professor Susan Brough. She is an internationally renowned architect, scholar, and professor of architectural engineering at Heriot-Watt University. She is a true pioneer, it says here, in the field of adapting buildings for climate change, having built the Oxford Echo House and published the Echo House series of books that continue to inspire new generations of architects, scientists, and engineers. Sue is going to be giving us a PowerPoint presentation. Over to you, Sue. Sue, are you there?
See that now, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
You can see the shared screen?
Yes,
Okay,
you can, yeah.
10 minutes, eh?
Yeah, 10 minutes. I'll give you a warning after 8 minutes, okay?
Okay. Yesterday, we had an extremely interesting talk from Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, talking about the economic situation in Britain. He titled it From Market to Moral Sentiments. And I want to talk now on the about the moral aspects of where we're going, because if we're going to talk about 100% renewable future, we have to be extremely clear where we're going, not shooting off in all directions. The first question is, why do we want to be 100% renewable? When do we want to be 100% renewable? Who do we as a society want to be when we get there? And then how do we get there? And this is a diagram from our Solar Cities movement. And this is from Daegu in South Korea, where they had a 2050 vision, which they aimed for and have systematically worked towards. Having once decided where they're going, they then had to work out the steps to get there. All of my points have got references you can follow up. And they said that if you're talking about an energy economy, you're not just talking about energy and counting it. You're talking about innovative renewable energy companies, governance, new industries, and so on. But you're also talking about creating an eco-cultural city. And they divided that into a healthy city, new lifestyles, and solar cities. I think really this moral aspect is incredibly important, and it's one I'm going to be following up on. And I'm just going to look at one aspect of this, which is health. And I think if you start thinking about equality, energy for all, and the elimination of fuel poverty, you're starting to, talk about putting a moral value on the way we develop and use energy, which is incredibly important. So I'm going to deal here with energy equity and the elimination of fuel poverty, which is such a widespread problem, and Keith has been fantastic in doing research in. Now, this is a study we did in one city, which is Dundee. And Dundee, nearly 35% of all homes in Scotland are in fuel poverty. And the figure in Dundee is even higher. So what we did, we mapped or developed the map of the multiple index of deprivation for Dundee. And we then mapped it over the solar potential of this south-facing city across the silvery reflective Tay. And we began to calculate exactly how many buildings and what the cost would be of trying to take those houses out of fuel poverty by putting solar systems on them. What we used is a roof array software. So we went to every single house and building in Dundee and then looked at those that were most deprived and calculated then how much PV we could get on the roofs, how much solar thermal we could get on the roofs, and then added to that some insulation and replacing boilers. This is in areas of the city where only 10% of people were employed when we did the study. It's published in 2014. And we looked at numbers of individuals and looked at the severe deprivation. We then calculated that on those houses that we could access, we could install, for instance, just of PV about 9.6 megawatt peaks and generate over 9 million kilowatt hours a year. And we could also, at the same time, install solar hot water capacity about 2.5 million kilowatt hours. So how much do huge plans like this cost? Well, we were able to put a figure on it. And for the houses we identified that we could access and install things on, I've updated it now, but we came to a figure for Dundee of 67 million. Yeah, that's for PV, solar, hot water, and batteries in about 4,500 homes to take every single family in Dundee out of fuel poverty and to save obviously millions of kilograms of CO2 at the same time. 67 million, what a lot of money. That is the unbudgeted overspend for the Aberdeen bypass, which costs more than £1 billion. So we have to come back to looking at how we count for energy, because those blank figures of energy generated and so on don't deal with the investment put back into local solar economy, with the solar industry, the better health of all those people who don't have to worry about paying their bills, fewer evictions because while they couldn't pay their energy bills, they couldn't pay their mortgage bills, and also the increase in the quality of the education, the quality of life, and the well-being of the people in that city. So in idealized worlds, aspirations often center on moving citizens closer to greener, more equitable lifestyles, where well-being of individuals and eco-industrial systems they inhabit are both high on the political agendas.
2 minutes, Sue.
Okay, the global economic pandemic, the global economic crisis, the COVID pandemic, the climate change catastrophe shows us that how we value things will have huge consequences on the health and resilience of ordinary people. Conventional accounting tools don't take into account all of those things which we should increasingly value. And so we really need to look at new consequential life cycle accounting systems where the values can be actually accounted in for the cost of the energy systems. So I go back right to where I started. We have to create a culture and a society in which we value what really matters for the health of people and the planet. And so we have to go right back to what is the vision and how do we get there in the full circle of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. So I totally agree with your view that our emphasis put on health and safety. It's really, really important. It's refreshing to see it. It really is. Well done. Now I'm going to move on to our last speaker.
Leslie Hines. Leslie Hines?
Who is Leslie Hines? Can people hear me? Put up your hand if you can hear me. Oh, nobody can hear me. God almighty.
Leslie?
Yes, you can. Right. Sorry, there's a technical glitch somewhere along the line. I don't know where it is. I'll continue. Leslie Hines, she is the chair of the Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative. I used to be a director. And she is a former City of Edinburgh councillor. She's held numerous positions, including leader, Lord Provost, and convener of its Transport and Environment Committee. Leslie is also a qualified primary school teacher and a past chair of NHS Health in Scotland. It's over to you now, Leslie.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. First of all, I'm not a professor, I'm not an academic, so I'm an ordinary punter, I suppose, in some ways, maybe not that ordinary, a politician, but a politician who's interested in the environment and climate change. I was asked to just speak about the Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative so that people would have an understanding of where it's come from and how long it did take to get there. And I think that's quite interesting when we are talking about the 100% renewable issues. my interest probably started, and I think that's why for young people and particularly education, started when I was studying modern studies at Kirkton High in Dundee. That's why I was interested talking about Dundee. Many years ago, and had a fantastic teacher who really was ahead of his time in terms of environmental issues. I've always had that interest. I also, as you've said, Ian, convened a Transport Environment Committee and got a real interest in that time as well. And as well as setting up Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative, I also set up with the Council Edinburgh's Energy Company, which I got inspired from Munich City Council. If anyone's ever looked at Munich City Council, who own their energy company. So the background is that in 2007, this is how far it goes back, is that Mark Lazarovich, who was MP at the time, and Sarah Boyack set up was called an Edinburgh Community Energy Cooperative. And one of the board members, just for a quote, said back in 2007, "I know that across Edinburgh people want to make their own personal contribution to tackling climate change. Promoting community energy is the ideal way to do that." And they basically set themselves up and they set certain criteria. I'm not going to go into it because I don't have the time. But they had basically tried to set up a district heating in 2009. It failed. They tried to set up an urban wind at Portobello and Leith Community Wind Turbine in 2011, and that didn't come to anything. There was some hope in Edinburgh during that time because there was a hydro at Harlow. If anyone knows that, it's a small development but a very important community development at hydro at Harlow. They also had a proposal in 2011 for a building in Leith, which just didn't happen. So at the end of it was at the end of the road in 2011-12, where people felt 4 or 5 years later, and all of these projects had never ever come to fruition as much as they tried. And I think a lot of them were talking about winding up the co-op, and they had lessons learned. And again, I could go into that later if people are interested. And the turning point for all of those individuals in that cooperative was in 2012, the council put itself forward as being a cooperative council. And the people who know back in that time, Andrew Burns, who's a big, huge environmental campaigner, was the leader of the council. And also I took over the transport environment convenership. And because of that whole cooperative and trying to set up cooperatives, and particularly in the manifesto we set, was to set up an energy cooperative council. And so the people who were involved previously in the co-op wound it up, but also put forward a proposal to the council. And I have to say, as a convener environmental and transport committee, many times I had to bang on the table with finance officials. It was not an easy ride because they kept saying there was too much risk, and it took a lot of effort. And I think politically, because of Andrew Burns and myself, we just pushed on and pushed it through the whole process. And there was also a feasibility and scoping happened in 2013 and 14, and that was very much involved with the council and working with the council officials who eventually believed that. And then come September 2015, we put forward a proposal for £1.4 million Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative. And many people will know, because of the Conservative government, there was an issue about tax where you could get tax relief if you invested, and also the whole feed-in tariff kind of did stop us in some ways. But become September 2016, the 1.4 million we managed to be able to go forward with. And the lessons learned from that was that we needed the people and the expertise and the time and the effort. We need access to tangible assets. We need incentives and community benefits. People have to say, what are we getting out of this? What's the community benefit? And we needed appropriate local support. And the key they felt was the Solar Cooperative was you needed that stronger political support. You need outcome and processes and policy focus. And you again need to look at the community benefits. And you need motivating and certain risks. So you can imagine at that time, all that process of going through all of that in terms of Solar Cooperative. So at the time, so that's from 2007 all the way down to there. And when we launched the Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative, it was the largest community-owned PV solar scheme of its kind in the UK. 24 buildings owned by the council. The City of Edinburgh Council received a fixed price electricity for 20 years and then fee panels at the end of that. And there was also Community Benefit Society, that's what we were called, and we wanted to reduce the carbon emissions in the city, reduce fuel poverty, and improve sustainability through education and energy efficiency. And we also want to display panels for educating people in the buildings as they came in, they would know what the purpose, etc. and that was. And also investing members received 5% SAGE, interest increasing with inflation. And anybody who wants to invest in banks will know that's a pretty good return. And all the surplus profits would be applied to delivering the objectives of the society. 80% of the members were residents of Edinburgh, and I think there's a real desire in Edinburgh to invest in community energy. And the Community Benefit Fund, which we give out grants to organisations that have got the panels on their buildings, they reckon there's going to be projected 1 million investment in community benefits over the 20 years, which is for grants. And we engaged Energy for All, if anyone knows Energy for All, and they now have 2 Scottish staff based here in Scotland, and I know they gave us support in carrying out finances and very much of support. And I found them personally extremely helpful and useful for us. We're now into phase 2, which is 6 buildings, and which I'll not go into, which they are, but 6 buildings. But again, we, like the previous one, we started off with 30 buildings and then 24. We started off with 11 buildings, and then we ended up with 6 buildings. And you'll know the FIT has been delayed and put forward. So there are 3 buildings out of the 6 that will get the feed-in tariff. And 660 odd thousand to raise, and we raised over 700,000, and we've just agreed a formula this week for allocating to the investors, and there's massive support from Edinburgh residents, which is fantastic. So achievements of the Solar Cooperative is delivering phase 1 and 2, also North Edinburgh Green Hub, and I can speak about a heat project that we're involved with just over the last couple of months or the last few weeks, and I can speak about that, but I'll not have time now. But if anybody wants to ask questions, I'm happy to do that. And it is linking into an area of deprivation in North Edinburgh, where I actually lived and have lived for the last 40 years. So I'm really interested in whether we can deliver that. We had a great deal of interest from places like churches, universities, but the easiest projects, I have to say, has been done with the council. We haven't addressed the issue of fuel poverty at all, as we set out at the beginning. And we've had a study set up for projects in North Edinburgh and Craigmillar, but we've only really pursued it in North Edinburgh, and because I think I live there and because I know the community groups and know the organisations. So just to finish off, I'm going to just give a few of my personal thoughts on how to get 100% renewable energy commitment in Scotland. My belief, and I'm not sure if everybody will agree with this, but I've also been involved with LRIC, which is the Race Equalities, who did 2 or 3 weeks ago about climate change as well. And it was actually surprising. All the political parties were agreeing with certain issues. And I think you need all party agreement before next year elections, put pressure on them in the manifesto for next year elections. You need to pursue the issue of the green jobs and what they can do for this economy in Scotland. We've only seen the BIFAB in Fife and the reaction to that, and just it seems unbelievable to me. The fuel poverty has to be to address, and we say it's a priority, but we don't say it is. And I think it has to be the top priority for next year's Scottish elections. My concern is that we'll only talk about independence and nothing else, and the climate change and renewable has to be talked about, and that issue has to get on the agenda, in my opinion. We need community engagement and commitment. They're the ones that will put pressures on the politicians. I know as a politician, if locally and citywide you can get pressure from your community, those are the people we need to get community engagement. But please, please, let's get the language in jargon free, because most people don't understand it. All people here I'm sure do, but how do we get that jargon free? I even get into it, and I think it's really hard. How do we get communities interested in climate change? What are the pluses for communities and individuals? What do they think they're going to get out of it, rather than just because they think it's a good thing? Cuts in councils' budgets, I think, has made a massive difference, and also that has an add-on effect to community groups. COVID-19, the effect of that in areas like North Edinburgh is absolutely unbelievable. So why should they be interested in climate change? What is it for them? And I think that's a question we need to answer. I think we need long-term investment. It's all short-term. We need long-term investment in order for that return. I believe, personally, we should nationalise the national grid. I thought it was a great policy in the Labour Party the last election, and that's something we need to do. It's, you know, you've got these firms, the companies. I know in the national grid, even in Edinburgh, we can't put solar panels in some of our buildings because the grid can't take it, and therefore we can't do it. We need to nationalise that so it's a benefit for us as a public and our community. So finally, Edinburgh Solar Community Cooperative was a long, hard slog for many of the people who were involved right from the beginning of 2017. But I think, and until now, I'm beginning to see positive change, and those small changes will make a difference to climate, but also make a change and a difference to people's lives. Thank you.
Well done, Leslie.